Well, hey, North Park Community Church, Pastor Luke here with another episode of First Looks. And we are returning to our series in the Gospel of Matthew. And if you can remember, I wonder if you can remember what the name of the series was that we put with this Gospel. And if you remember, it was The Way of the King. The Way of the King. And if you couldn't remember before I said it, I hope it quickly rings a bell because we said it every single week from beginning with Labor Day weekend last year up until the end of May this year. And so we talked about it a lot. And so we're returning to that, and we're going to be focusing in on Matthew chapter 12. Is where we're picking up, beginning in verse 1 and going through verse 14. And what we see is Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, Shabbat. Now, you'll see that while I've got chapter 12 kind of focused in right there, we do have a couple of verses from the end of chapter 11, and so this would be 11:28 to 30 that we've got right there, and I thought I'd include that just for a little bit of context, and who knows, maybe we'll see that chapter 12 is picking up on some themes, and so we'll see what we find. So let me go ahead and read for us the end of 11 and roll straight into chapter 12, and we'll see if we can make some connections and explore this text a little bit and start to pave the way for what will become the message. So Jesus says, come to me, all who labor or work and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and implicit in that is not another's, and learn from me. Not others. For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. There will be rest for the soul. His yoke is easy, his burden is light. We could say what he requires of us. Okay, so that leads us into chapter 12, in which Jesus says, at that time. So this connects what Jesus says at the end of 11 and the beginning of 12. And he went through the grain fields. He was walking through the grain fields on the Sabbath, Shabbat. Now, Sabbath, if we remember from Hebrew class, is Hebrew for ceasing, or resting. So it's Sabbath, and Jesus and his disciples are walking through grain fields, and his disciples, they're hungry. Disciples were hungry, and what did they begin to do? They began to pluck heads of the grain to eat. Hunger brings eating. Sophisticated stuff there. Now here's the thing. Plucking heads of grain this equals harvesting, and Luke's account includes rubbing in hands, which equals threshing, which, according to Sabbath rules, is work. Thus breaking Sabbath laws. So that's what this means when they're plucking heads of grain. For us, we're probably thinking, what's the big deal here? To faithful Torah-observing Jews, a lot. And so the Pharisees, who were the strictest law keepers, when the Pharisees saw this happening, they said to Jesus, and they said it to him because they knew Jesus to be leader, and therefore what his disciples do is something that he obviously condones and allows. And they say, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to them, this is a citation from 1 Samuel, what is it? I want to say that it's 21. 1 Samuel 21. And in 1 Samuel 21, let me get there we go. And here, David goes to the priest and says that he and his men were hungry, and so it says that he entered the house of God, and there he asked for the bread of the presence, the consecrated bread that was holy and used as part of the ritual offerings. And what some presume is that David did this on the Sabbath because the bread of the presence was offered on the Sabbath. And it says that it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Now, even though some kind of speculate that perhaps David was making this request on the Sabbath, Matthew doesn't include it. Jesus doesn't say anything about it being the Sabbath. And so while there's some speculation on that, we don't want to go too far and make that be the point, because it doesn't seem to be the point for Matthew. Here's what it is. David was hungry, and so he entered the house of God, and he ate the bread of the presence. And Jesus says that this is for the priests, but apparently David ate it, and there was no condemnation upon him for it. So the lack of condemnation indicates that it was acceptable for David to do this. All right. Now let's look at the next story and go from there. Now, in this next one, Jesus says, "Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane," or what they do is they break, quote unquote, Sabbath laws, and are guiltless. Okay. They break Sabbath laws and are guiltless. What's this talking about? What happened here is that the priests, and this would be in, let me put it over here, Numbers 28, 9 through 10 would be that reference. What happened is that priests had required service to render on the Sabbath. And so they break the rules, but aren't guilty because God, who makes the rules, allowed it. God, who makes the rules, allowed it. And so what Jesus is showing us is that the law is not the end. The law flows from God. God is the end. God is the giver of the law, the maker of the law, and he can make whatever exceptions he wants to make. He can do whatever he wants to do because he's God. Now, so Jesus is getting after something here. One, the law is not the highest authority. God is the highest authority. And serving, the life of service is the life of service to God, not the life of service to a particular law. Now, we obviously need to qualify that because you can run a lot of directions with that away from scripture or biblical teaching. Now, this exception to Sabbath regulation is an exception that God prescribed for his priests. And so what we have going on here is we've got an issue of authority, and we have issue of ultimate telos, ultimate end goal fulfillment. We've got that going on. So now look at this next statement. So after Jesus gives these two Old Testament examples that he's using to build a case with, he says, I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. Now that's a strong statement. Temple housed presence of God. What could be greater? God incarnate. And Jesus is really making the statement that he is God right here. And he goes on to say, if you had known what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. This is Hosea 6:6. And also, this is not the first time that Jesus has said this to the Pharisees. Said to Pharisees in chapter 9. Is it chapter 9? Chapter 9, where it's the calling of Levi, the calling of Matthew. In that account, Jesus says the same thing. Jesus is dining with sinners and tax collectors. Pharisees are ridiculing him for it, and he says, if you would have known what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, then you would not have condemned the guiltless. So Jesus makes it real clear. Jesus and his disciples are without sin in this. And then here we go, the big statement, the big powerhouse statement. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is King of the rest. That's good. Now, which is a statement of authority. Jesus is the one who's able to make that statement. He's the one who's and who initially inaugurated the Sabbath. The Sabbath came from God, and for Jesus to say that he's the Lord, King over the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was instituted by God, then Jesus is making quite the strong statement here, and the Pharisees will have quite the strong response later on, for sure. But let's go ahead and let's look at some of these other passages that help us understand about the nature of the Sabbath. This is Genesis 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished. That's completed work. And the host of them, and the seventh day God finishes his work that he had done, and he rested. He Sabbathed on the seventh day from the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Was God tired? No. Exhausted? No. It was a resting with enjoyment and delight. Okay, so then we get to Exodus 20 and the Ten Commandments. And notice this here. Remember the Sabbath day. This is the only command of the 10 with remembering as part of it. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son, your daughter, male servant, female servant, or livestock, sojourner within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and the sea and all that is in them, and God rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So, why Sabbath? To remember God's good work of creation. See Genesis 2. That's the rationale for the law. There you go. Bear God's image by working 6 days, resting on the seventh, and remember that God rested, and therefore we rest as well. And there's blessing. There's blessing in the Sabbath. There's blessing in the Sabbath. This is connected to Genesis 2. This is not connected to the Mosaic Law in any way right now. But if we do go down one more, we'll see that there's a recapitulation of the law in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And in Deuteronomy 5, it says, observe the Sabbath day. Keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, but on the seventh day it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, your son, your daughter, your male servant, female servant, or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. And so you were a slave, and God brought you out from there. And so, why Sabbath? To remember God's deliverance and salvation from slavery. And so that's why you keep the Sabbath day. So it's quite interesting that we have the Sabbath law given twice, but it's connected to two different reasons why. The first being to mirror God's creative work, creation example. The second one is to see salvation as the reason why, in which salvation is ultimately a recreation story. A restoration to God's good design and intent for the world. And so in that regard, we see how these two are connected. That's probably a bad color to use anyway. Yeah, well. Okay, so coming back to our text right here. We see how Sabbath is so connected to God and to God's work, and for Jesus to say that he's Lord of the Sabbath, he's saying he's God again. Oops. Yeah. To say Jesus is Lord of Sabbath is to equate him with God of creation and redemption. So he goes on from the synagogue there. There's a man with a withered hand. And they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And so that they might accuse him. They're trying to trap Jesus because healing non-emergent situations is work and unlawful. So I can die from his withered hand. Save it for Monday. Save it for Sunday, I guess. Now, they're trying to accuse him, and Jesus responds like this. He says, which one of you has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Now this is it. Here we go. Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? You guys are so backwards. The Lord of Sabbath values you. That'll fit into this whole thing. And so he says, so it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Of course it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath, because Sabbath is a gift of goodness in and of itself. Doing good fits. And Jesus said to the man, stretch out your hand. The man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. And so an image of Sabbath in Deuteronomy 5, which is all about God's deliverance and salvation. And Jesus is showing that God is at work. He is at work to restore the goodness of creation. Sabbath is a reminder of that work that God is doing, and it's a rest. And so the Pharisees, they catch what Jesus is saying by calling himself Lord of the Sabbath, by him working, and so they went out and they conspired against him to destroy him, because they had no doubt about what Jesus is saying about himself. There's no question. Now, let's just kind of take this. Jesus, he's Lord of the Sabbath. He makes the rules. He's in charge. He's El Capitan. And the Sabbath is, of course, it's not in contradiction to doing good when doing good is an option for somebody. Doing good fits because doing good, it on the Sabbath is reminding us of God's good creation and God's restoration to that goodness. And all of that happens through whom? The Lord of the Sabbath. And that's what we have right here in Hebrews chapter 4. In Hebrews chapter 4, it says this: Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed enter that rest. Just as he said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. Okay, so that's connecting us to Genesis 2. For he somewhere is spoken on the seventh day in this way: God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, the passage, it says, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and for those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day today, saying through David so long afterwards, in the words already quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, and whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. There you go. The Sabbath, is it still important for us? Well, I think so, because the Sabbath is about remembering. And when we participate in the Sabbath today, it's not intended to be a yoke of slavery. It's supposed to be a gift for us to pause, to cease, to remember God's work, and to have our lives and our bodies pursue a stillness and a restfulness that mirrors our spiritual state as having rest in God perfectly and finally and fully in Jesus. And so the Sabbath observance today still serves a function as it propels us to find rest and joy in the finished work of Jesus, our ultimate rest. And so that'll preach, and I plan to preach it on Sunday. So there it is. There's so much here. There's so much more that could still be said, but this is good. This is great stuff. I've gone longer than I intended, but c'est la vie, c'est la vie. Please pray for me, church. I love you, and I'll see you in a couple days.